Good evening, everybody. Evening. Trying to make sure that our live stream got started. Looks like we're having some internet issues. The feed doesn't seem to be coming through clear, so um, I may have to kill some of the streams.
Okay.
See if that'll clean it up. Let's see. Maybe that'll help the stream. May have to kill. Good evening, everybody. We're just trying to get the live stream sorted out. We seem to be having some bandwidth issues um, currently. I think we can get that fixed. Good evening. Good evening. All right, Doc, we go ahead and get started, I think.
Okay. Well, we're grateful for all of you, and we're grateful for this another opportunity to gather together in this joint Bible study. It has been such a blessing for us at First Baptist to join with my friend and brother, Pastor Shoulders, and you, David's Temple, for this another Bible study. We're focusing tonight on Isaiah, the 55th chapter, particularly that first verse. And Pastor Shoulders, tonight is going to be unique because we're going to be looking through the lens of this commentary by our friend, by our mentor, Dr. Jotham White, In His Presence, which is a book we've mentioned a couple of times on our joint Bible study uh, broadcast. And it's a book that's been a blessing to both of us. It's written by Dr. White, who is a mentor and a friend to both of us. And he has some insights for us in the 57th chapter of this devotional that are very helpful and are very instructive as we think through how the church is to navigate this new landscape and what it looks like to live faithfully in community with each other.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I read, and what was so striking about it is how the attitude that um, prevails from this invitation seems to be in contrast with the attitude of the Big C Church,
Yeah.
the Universal Church.
Right.
So I want to, if you read the passage, if you could read 1 through 3 for us,
Okay.
I think that'd be helpful to kind of set the stage for the discussion.
Yeah, I want to read 1 through 3, and given that Dr. White's devotional is just a few paragraphs, I want to read that as well. So I'm reading from Isaiah, the 55th chapter, verses 1 through 3. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me and hear, that your soul may live. And I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. And I'm reading now from Dr. White's devotional, In His Presence. He says, God has issued his grand and breathtaking invitation. I'm always fascinated by God's invitation because His invitation is entirely different from other invitations I've seen. God always includes everyone in his invitation. He leaves no one out. No matter one's status in life, he or she is always welcome as God's guest. Peter was on point when he said, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. God does not discriminate based on race, economics, or sex. His invitation is inclusive. That's why I love his invitation so. But on the other hand, there are those invitations that cannot stand in the shadow of God's invitation. They are very selective regarding who they invite. I can understand that because no one can invite the entire world to come to their banquet. If money is no problem, a specific location would be. With this understanding in mind, social invitations are issued with particular people in mind. Those who don't fit their spectrum are deliberately left out. The reason for leaving them out varies. I even know of a particular pastor that invites certain types of people to join, quote, his church, end quote. I deliberately said his church because it is his church. God's church operates based on these unchanging words. Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye, buy and eat. Yea, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Black Friday is a time of the year when retailers and big brands offer significant discounts on all kinds of products. People stand in line for hours so that they can get the best deals leading up to Christmas. People will go out of their way to get a great deal. A good deal always makes people feel good. Everybody wants a great deal. God offers the greatest deal of the day, and you would be wise not to miss out on it. Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or Amazon.com never offered a better deal. With God, everything is free. You don't need any money. All that is needed is trust in the seller who invites you to come and buy without money. The product that is being sold is not a passing thrill. Instead, it is salvation that comes with a guarantee of complete satisfaction in this world and the world to come. This is the greatest bargain this world has ever known and will ever know. Have you bought into this unparalleled bargain? It is the best deal of the day.
As you were reading, Doc, I noticed we had several people join, so they probably didn't catch the full reading of that or the context. But in essence, in Isaiah 55, right, it's this invitation from God offering what seems to be restoration or renewal or peace to a group of people. And I think it's a pretty inclusive group of people.
Yeah.
And he extends this invitation in such a, I hate to use the term liberal because it's so politically charged, but in such a liberal fashion, right? Generous fashion.
Yeah.
Without concern about being taken advantage of or without any concern of being misused or misleveraged or without any of that. He extends this invitation.
Yeah.
And as Dr. White pointed out in his devotional, this invitation is unlike many invitations that we see, even in church.
It's unlike any invitation that we see in church and in the culture that surrounds us. In economics, there's this idea called the tragedy of the commons. Right. And the basic principle behind this idea is any time a public good is free, that people will take as much of it as they can. Yeah. Irrespective of the impact that they're taking it may have on everyone else who may need it. Right. And that kind of thinking, I think, often pervades the church. Right. We're very nervous about people coming in and using up and absorbing all of our resources.
All of our stuff.
Because we think of it as our stuff, not God's stuff. Yeah. But in this passage, as you pointed out, God is offering an invitation for everyone to come, for everyone to be blessed, for everyone to be filled, for everyone to engage in authentic and affirming and transforming relationship with him, unconcerned about whether or not anyone will ever use up all of the salvation being offered, unconcerned about whether or not anyone will use up all of the substance and all of the material blessing that's alluded to in this passage. Not that this passage is about substance or material blessing. So we see that the mindset of God
Mhm.
is to give and to
Yeah.
give and
Freely.
to give freely.
Generously.
Absolutely. And that contrasts greatly with the mindset that pervades our modern church.
Right. And I think that's problematic.
Absolutely. That's deeply problematic.
I think it's problematic whenever our attitudes are in contrast to the attitude, to the heart, to the mind of God, or the
Yeah.
heart and mind of Jesus.
Because we're supposed to be God's people.
Image bearers.
Absolutely.
Right.
Image bearers, and we are supposed to be those who reflect
Yeah.
the character of God.
Right.
In the way that we handle, in the way that we deal with and engage with those in the world around us and those in the community around us. And we see his generosity in this passage contrasted with our stinginess.
Right.
We see his openness and willingness to invite and engage contrasted with our tendency, I think, to often be exclusive or exclusionary.
Mhm.
This passage is so striking because at once it offers us so much hope
Mhm.
for the Christian,
Mhm.
so much joy
Mhm.
for the Christian, that if you are in saving relationship with Christ, you've taken advantage of this invitation. And at the same time, it's such powerful conviction
Yeah.
that although we've taken advantage of the invitation, I think that sometimes consciously or unconsciously we behave in ways that make it hard for others.
Yeah. You said you used the word you used the word stingy.
Yeah.
What's so funny is that we often try to mask that stinginess
Yeah.
with good stewardship.
Sure.
You know, we confuse being stingy and being good stewards.
Sure.
But I think this passage in Isaiah, in this devotional, kind of helps us to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
So again, as we kind of discuss this, I think it's only fair if we discuss this from the perspective of this is something that we struggle with,
Right.
all of us,
Right.
all churches, I think,
Yeah.
to varying degrees.
Sure.
And it's something that we must wrestle with.
Absolutely.
We must wrestle with these feelings of stinginess,
Sure.
or being reserved,
Sure.
or trying to create a culture of exclusivity within the church,
Sure.
the country club church.
Sure.
So to be fair, it's just something that we got to wrestle with.
Well, it's something that we have to wrestle with because the kingdom of heaven stands in such contrast to our human and secular idea of kingdom.
Right.
We want to build a fortress.
Yeah.
We want to build a castle.
Yeah.
And there's this, great illustration in one of the sermons from an ancient Scottish preacher about this king who's going off to battle, and he leaves one of his servants in charge of the castle. And he tells him, protect the castle at all costs. No matter what you do, protect the castle.
Right.
And when he returns from battle, he's excited initially because he sees a wall around the castle. And he gets inside the perimeter of the wall, and he doesn't see a castle. And he asks his servant, what happened to the castle? And he says, we tore down the castle to build the wall, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing they were supposed to be protecting, they were destroying it, right? And I think when we see what God is calling us to in his kingdom stands in such contrast to our idea of kingdom. God is calling us to a kingdom that gives generously. Our idea of a kingdom or a community or a membership, I think oftentimes is based on that which is limited and exclusive.
Right.
God is calling us to a kingdom that says, come.
That's an idea that I think we really have to learn to accept. And it's challenging because God blesses our churches even with material things, money, infrastructure, facilities, all of these things, transportation. And in a very real sense, we know that these things don't last forever. They wear out. They run out. They need repairs. All of those things. And it makes us super conscious of how we use those resources to the glory of God, and even who we are willing to invite in to enjoy those resources. Because we're keenly aware of the fact that, hey, these resources are not eternal.
And I think in our awareness and even in our concern about the resources, I think it's really possible, again, for us to lose sight of the giver
Yeah.
and focus on preserving,
Mhm.
sustaining the gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I think that's why the terminology that you used earlier, I think is so apropos, because we have to struggle with it. I
Yeah.
think we have to be able to evaluate ourselves in the life of this passage and hear the generosity
Mhm.
in the voice of God saying, "Come," and think about all of the ways in which we prevent people consciously or unconsciously from coming.
Mhm.
I think we have to look at this passage, as the devotional points out, as perhaps the world's greatest invitation,
Mhm.
right? And then consider all the ways in which consciously or unconsciously
Mhm.
we function as those who prevent.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes our concern and our desire to be good stewards of our resources can very easily tip over into us just becoming holders
Here's the issue.
of
I
provision.
want to point out something you just said, and again, I want to apologize to everybody watching the live feeds. The internet connection seems to be a little bit unstable, so the quality might not be as good. However, you said the temptation that we have
Yeah.
to be stingy with our resources.
Yeah, they're Lord's resource.
Therein lies the problem.
Yeah.
And Dr. White points it out because he says, I even know of a particular pastor that invites certain types of people to join his church.
Yeah.
I deliberately said his church.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's his church.
Right.
But God operates from a totally different perspective.
It's
and that's
his
the problem.
church. Yeah,
Right.
you're absolutely right. It's, in Dr. White's example, it ceases to be, and this is
the
why,
Lord's church.
yeah, this is why this passage and this conversation
Yeah.
and this principle is so important.
Yeah.
Because it ceases to be God's church
Right.
when we monopolize and control all of the resources to the extent that no one's being blessed, no one's being helped, no doors are being opened, no invitations are being given.
Yeah.
That's when it ceases
Yeah.
to be God's church.
Yeah.
You see this paralleled in the New Testament
Mhm.
when Jesus talks to the disciples about how they're going to revile you in their synagogues,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's so easy for the church to become ours, and us to fail to understand that when it becomes ours, it ceases to be God's.
Yeah.
It's God's church. It's God's money. It's God's reputation on the line.
Here's a great practical, I think, piece to this text that helps us to gauge whether or not these are still the Lord's resources, or
Yeah.
have we made them solely our resources.
Mhm.
One of the ways, or one of the parameters for this, the litmus test for this, is whether or not, or how willing we are
Yeah.
to share these things
Yeah.
with everyone,
Yeah.
not just certain type of people.
Sure.
So I believe that this is a great way for us to measure when we have these discussions and meetings and conversations, to reset and to think about, okay, we say this is the Lord's church.
Yeah.
But is this really the Lord's church?
How do we know?
And how do we know?
What evidence do we have?
One way to determine whether or not we have seized control or
Yeah.
attempted to seize control of God's resources
Yeah.
is by determining how willing we are to share and invite
Yeah.
any and everyone.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just, God's not a respecter of persons, and so it can't just be reserved for certain types of people. But again, it goes back to the thing when we think about, okay, we've been blessed with these resources. We're supposed to be good stewards of these resources, and we understand that these things wear out, they run out,
Yeah.
right? And so we got to be conscious and cognizant of our ability.
Yeah.
This is how we think, our ability to be able to maintain,
Yeah.
and do all of these things.
And even that, and in the same way, right? Even that thought process is a thought process that takes the maintaining of the resources out of God's hands and puts it into ours. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been spending a lot of time listening to this hymn, "He giveth more grace
Yeah.
when the burdens grow greater." And there's so many lines in this hymn that I found great comfort in lately as we sort of deal with and pastor and preach and teach and lead churches through this this difficult moment when the burdens have grown greater. And one of the lines in that hymn is, "Fear not that your needs have exceeded his provision."
Mm.
And it's so easy for us to become, and I've mentioned this before, good accountants
Yeah.
that are really good at balancing our books,
Mhm.
but bad Christians,
Mhm.
bad representative of God, bad representatives of God and God's kingdom and
Right.
God's plan and God's word, the gospel.
Yeah.
You know, and it's completely possible for us to become so fixated on, okay, how do we maintain all that we have?
Yeah.
And completely take our eyes off the fact that it's God who's the giver,
Mhm.
and that if God blesses us with something, that it's God's responsibility to preserve it and maintain it in a way that is consistent with his will. And we're not saying, and I feel like I have to give this disclaimer,
Yeah.
that our churches ought not to be good stewards of
Oh,
their
yeah.
resources.
Oh, yeah.
We are saying that good stewardship means godly stewardship.
Yeah.
And godly stewardship means that we are concerned not only about conserving what we have,
Right.
but being a blessing with what God has given us.
I mean, we don't want our stewardship to become a barrier to salvation.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want to discourage people based on our stewardship.
Yeah.
I mean, I like what the text says in the way it describes just how willing God is to invite everybody. And Dr. White points this out, but this invitation is unlike many other invitations, right?
Yeah.
On a very theological and spiritual level,
Right.
we think about the fact that God can afford
Yeah.
to invite everybody.
Sure.
He can afford to feed everybody.
Sure.
He can
As
afford-
Dr. White points out, the finances aren't a problem for God. The location,
not a problem.
not a problem
Yeah.
for God. Yeah.
That's in contrast, Doc, because we're planning a wedding.
Yeah.
And we can't afford
to invite
to
everybody
invite everybody
or feed everybody.
Or feed everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even when you bring it down to that level, and we start to talk about some of the ethereal matters,
Yeah.
right? And we move from our personal perspectives and stewardship to now the church's
Yeah.
stewardship.
Yeah.
Because we, as the churches in Acts did, pool together everything that we have,
Sure.
we also, along with God's grace, are enabled to do even more than what we
Absolutely.
would be willing to do on a personal level.
Yeah.
So whereas if we were hosting a party ourselves as
Yeah.
individuals,
Yeah.
we'd be very limited
Yeah.
in what we'd be able to do.
Sure.
But when we come together as brothers and sisters in Christ
To
bring
do
our,
ministry.
and bring
Yeah.
our resources together,
Yeah.
and with the aim of glorifying God,
Yeah.
right? And God blesses that, we
Yeah.
can do a whole lot
That's
more.
the
So it's almost like we have to be willing to set aside our personal idea
that's absolutely right.
of what's too much.
Yeah. Right.
Or how far do we go before
And
it
so
doesn't take all
I
that?
want to give a sort of second. You gave a great practical point earlier. I want to give a second sort of practical point, a practical takeaway from this biblical text and this wonderful devotion that Dr. White has written. We should ask as we're deploying our resources ourselves this question: how much are we praying about this?
Yeah.
How much are we seeking God's guidance about this? Is our decision making done on the basis of economics exclusively?
Yeah.
Or have we sought God for his will
Mhm.
concerning these resources?
Mhm.
So have we prayed?
We've got to be willing. We've got to consult the shepherd
Yeah.
more diligently
Yeah.
than we consult the spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
That has to be our approach.
And we have to understand that consulting the shepherd is more consequential.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Than anything that we find on the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because his calculus is so much different
Absolutely.
than any formula.
What I love about the the transition or the contrast that Dr. White makes in his devotional here is he moves in the second part of this devotional to our desire for a good deal. He talks about Black Friday and our desire to go out and get a good deal and shop and consume. Black Friday is a time where stores are inviting us to consume. They're inviting us to spend. But in this passage,
he says,
in
"Bring no
Isaiah
money."
55, God is inviting us to receive. And it's so striking that we are attuned to an invitation for the purpose of consumption. But I think it's easy for us sometimes to become reluctant to accept this invitation, which is not about our spending, but rather about our receiving. And it was really striking, the language, the generous language of this passage, contrasted with us who live in this culture that is subsumed with consumerism and the "what can I get out of it" question. What value does it offer to me question. What's the benefit for me question, right? And we see that our selfishness and our self-centeredness contrasted with the generosity of God in this passage.
And it's again something we have to wrestle with when we think about the issue of compassion or the lack of compassion in the church. That issue is exasperated when we fail to be generous. When our hearts turn stingy. And I think that's something that we have to reckon with. But I think also too, we've got to be careful, right? Because there are those who strongly believe that the church should be a church of cause, like the church should find a cause, a social issue or something to completely expend its efforts and its energies and its resources into. But that's not the goal here.
Well, the cause of the church is salvation.
Exactly. The cause of the church is salvation. But so when I say the cause, I'm talking about on a social level. So that's what I'm saying. That's not the goal here. The purpose here is coming to God. It is redemptive. It is salvific. It is all of those things. And so I think when our hearts and minds are aligned on, we're not, and again, we're not being generous in order to bribe people into coming to church or into having a relationship. We're not trying to buy church members. What we are doing is trying to imitate God, in his generosity and his compassion. And through that, let them get a glimpse of God. And from that connection, that relationship, their relationship with God, that whole process is initiated because they've tasted what God is like.
What Roman emperors said about the growing of the early church and how their system stood out in contrast over against the Roman system is that Christians give to people and serve people who are not even in their ranks.
Amen.
And to the Roman emperors and to those in the Roman patrician echelon of their society, it struck them as very strange. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before in the religious world. These people who had such radical generosity that they gave of their time and their service and their resources to people who couldn't or wouldn't be able to repay that giving, you know what I mean? And that's what we see in this passage. And we see what God has to give and the value of what God has to give contrasted with that which the world has to give. Why do you spend your money, verse 2, for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? That's not about eating. That's not about physical bread. But that's about, as long as your life is about getting material things, you'll never feel that place that God has placed inside of you that only he can feel.
And that's something we have to settle with, that we live in the age of the consumer. And a lot of people are looking for or going to evaluate the church based on what they have to offer me. And that is not I don't believe that that is a biblical perspective
Yeah.
on how to evaluate or view the church.
Yeah.
Um, so as members, and we're talking about the church being more generous and this lack of compassion, we should not let that quail our generosity,
Yeah.
though, right?
Yeah.
Because we should not have an expectation that, okay, if we give a little bit more, if we spend a little bit more in this, if we do a little bit more in this area,
Yeah.
then we'll be able basically to win
Right.
the approval
Right.
of more people, and
Right.
more people will
Right.
join and be pleased with our church.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is a church growth technique, I
Yeah.
think, that people employ.
Sure.
But I think at the end of the day, our aim should be we want to basically imitate the compassion and the generosity
How
of God,
can we glorify God?
and we want people to be impacted by that.
Yeah.
Impacted by what they witness of the church's compassion
Yeah.
and generosity.
Yeah.
That should spur their relationship with the church
Absolutely.
and with God.
Yeah.
And I think we have to keep that in mind, because it's so easy to get caught up in the rat race.
Yeah.
Right? To spend more in the big facility.
Well,
and
it's
to
so
upgrade
easy to
this and
think of our
upgrade
church as
Um,
competing
Yeah.
with other churches.
that. Right. And I think that's not what this passage or this idea of God's generosity is calling us to do
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
It's not calling us to say, okay, in order to keep up, in order to keep the roll up and the membership up,
Sure.
we got to spend this money
Sure.
to get our to see the ROI that we want to see. The return
Yeah.
on investment that we want means that we have to be willing to spend this money here, and then more people will watch,
Right.
more people will come,
Right.
more people will give,
Right.
and then we can do even more,
Right.
And attract more people.
Right.
That's not the system.
Right.
Right.
That's not the mindset.
That's not the mindset. That's
Yeah.
not ministry.
Yeah. That's not Christianity.
Right.
I mean, that what you just articulated is a highly capitalistic, consumeristic, individualistic mindset and methodology of approaching church as an organization
Now,
and an entity, but not a
here-
community.
Here's where that works, though, right? It works if your motivation is, okay, we want to spend this money here because we want to be more hospitable.
Sure.
We want to be able to show the current members, those who are part of this local church and this local body, we want to be able to express our gratitude and how much they mean to the local church.
Right.
Each member means to the local church by being compassionate and being generous here.
Right.
I think it works in that way.
Sure.
So I think there's a fine line between saying we want to do this in order to attract more people,
Right.
and then saying we want to do this to show people our generosity.
That's a difference in the aim, and that's a difference in the philosophy.
Right.
In the first example that you gave, the entire function of that structure and that philosophy is more people,
Mm-hmm.
not salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And this passage
Mm-hmm.
is about salvation.
Mm-hmm.
It uses the examples, it uses the illustrations
Mhm.
of substance, of wine and milk and bread, which in the context surrounding the text, people would have understood to be staples that they need to live.
Right. Right.
But it's not just about those things.
Right.
It's about coming into relationship with God.
Right.
Because later in Isaiah 55, it'll say, "Let the wicked forsake his way."
Yeah.
Right. And so our aim has to be not balancing the books,
Mhm.
but pleasing and serving God
Mhm.
and living faithfully as his people,
Yeah.
and deploying our resources to the end that he is glorified
Right.
and uplifted.
I think that's it. Glorifying God.
Yeah.
And this passage and this devotional speaks to glorifying God through our generosity
Yeah.
and our compassion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a question about, well, how many people can we afford to feed? How many, this, how many that? The question should not be, we should not approach it from basically what's the minimum we can do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should approach it from what's the most we can do.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, I'm a big fan of not, having ticket sales or anything like that for a church event.
Yeah.
Because it's an opportunity for the church to just say, we want you to come.
We want you to come.
We want to host you. We want to
Yeah.
show you our hospitality. We want to
Yeah.
feed you. We want you to come.
Yeah.
If it costs us something, That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
We want you to come.
Well, and
We want God to be glorified through what we're doing.
that's what it means to be a blessing to the community. And I think that so many of our churches are churches, unfortunately, that can be characterized by, the quote that the former president of Judson College, she was speaking to a group of young ladies about modern Christianity. And she said that so many churches that I've gone into are filled with people that are kind,
Mhm.
but cold,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There's no warmth.
Mhm.
There's no compassion. There's no real concern, And I think that it's not just the writing of a check that matters,
Yeah.
But it's the nature in which you do it.
Right.
What's the aim?
Yeah.
In this passage in the book and in this passage in Dr. White's devotional, God is calling us to him
Yeah.
with the aim of salvation,
Yeah.
with the aim of transformation, with the aim of giving us, as Dr. White said, happiness and contentment in this life and the next.
And the next, yeah.
That's the aim.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think this is, again, it's just something that we'll have to wrestle with. Every decision,
Sure.
right? Every meeting, every idea, right? We need to try to look at it through this lens.
Yeah.
Because it's not always cut and dry either.
Yeah. Is God being glorified in this?
Right. And so it doesn't mean that we should, not, we should neglect good stewardship. I'll
Yeah.
put it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it means that we should view these opportunities, these decisions, these questions through the lens of, is this an opportunity for us to imitate the generosity and the compassion of God?
Yeah.
Right? Does what we're planning or what we're doing, does it first of all honor God, or does it glorify God?
Yeah.
And then in how we plan it and how we do it, how can we, even in that, imitate the generosity and compassion of God?
The best stewardship decision we could ever make is putting our resources in the Lord's hand.
Yeah.
When Jesus is teaching people at what had initially began as a retreat for the disciples because they were tired.
Mm-hmm.
And he says to them, come away with me into a desolate place.
Mm-hmm.
And a crowd gathers around him, which we'll later find out is 5,000 men, not counting women and children.
Mm-hmm.
One view of resources and responsible stewardship would have been that little boy saying, well, I'm a good steward.
Mm-hmm.
Or my mother
Mm-hmm.
or father, or whoever packed my lunch,
Mm-hmm.
they were a good steward because I've got something to eat. Everyone else is hungry.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the beneficiary of good stewardship
Mm-hmm.
because although they're hungry, I've got something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But that, in the context of that passage, is one view of stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
But the higher view of stewardship,
Mm-hmm.
the biblical view of stewardship, the God glorifying view of stewardship is putting our resources into the Lord's hand.
Yeah.
Because it is only after that where he blesses it
Mm-hmm.
and multiplies it.
Right.
And so the best thing that we can do in stewardship is entrust our resources to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Economics would have told that little boy, oh no, there's no way.
Yeah.
What you have can even be sufficient. This is what the disciple says, all we have,
Mm-hmm.
2 fish, 5 loaves of bread. But what are they among so many? That's the economic perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? The demand is going to far exceed the supply, pushing us into an inflationary economic situation, Jesus. What are they among so many?
Yeah.
But good stewardship says, Lord, here it is.
Yeah.
And I've in every one of these Bible studies, I've been so convicted by our history. Because the history of our church tradition is a history of great stewardship, not just in terms of resources, but in terms of people.
Oh, yeah.
What the Black church has given America
Mm-hmm.
is good stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
We gave America King and Fannie Lou Hamer. You see what I'm saying? That's good stewardship of people.
Right.
But our communities, man, have these churches in them that people came into Sunday after Sunday with nickels and dimes and gave. That's the story of our church. That's the story of David. Simple, that there were people who were the least of these, who lived on the margins of their society, who made a fraction of what their neighbors made in the fields and on their jobs. But on Sunday morning, they came in the Lord's house with something.
Right. Right.
Not for the social pomp of giving and having something to give, but because they understood the best thing they could do with that nickel was give it to the Lord.
Yeah. Honor God with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we read further in Isaiah 55, right? And we start, well, I'd say the end of the chapter, toward the end of the chapter, in verse 12. And God kind of talks about, he begins talking about what happens to those who accept this invitation, right? Who come into his presence and leverage everything that God is willing to give by trusting, by coming. And it says, for you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. And so it makes me think about, you know, our desire should be that when we have an opportunity to imitate God in this manner, and extend that invitation to those and invite them in and show that compassion, so that people come in, we can take our mind off of what it's going to cost us, when we think about the outcome or the benefit, right? When we think about how that compassion and that generosity could be translated into somebody's peace.
Absolutely.
Into somebody's soul being saved.
That's absolutely right.
And then we'll look back and we won't even think about, well, what did we spend on that event? Or what did we spend on this? But we'll look at the individuals whose lives have been positively impacted. And I shouldn't say positively impacted, because I think too often we're looking for things to make a positive impact on our lives. And sometimes we view Christianity and Jesus as just another thing that can help improve our lives. Lives be changed. When we see people whose lives have been changed because of the compassion and generosity of the church, I think it takes our minds away from the spreadsheet, and we don't even have to talk about
it's more than that. It's more than it takes our minds away from the spreadsheet. It transforms our thinking. And it literally transforms our thinking and our understanding of our resources.
And man, it becomes infectious. And it becomes addictive. Like you want to witness that more. You want to experience that more.
Absolutely.
And so I think, sometimes you just you got to take that first step and say, you know what? If we are the Lord's church, if we are going to do ministry, we need to stop letting our efforts in stewardship become hurdles to salvation. Because our baptismal has been dry for a really long time. We have not seen anyone come into the church and be visibly changed by the gospel. Right? So if we want our ministries to be fruitful and effective, and to be what Christ has called them to be, let's try being more compassionate and more generous.
Or else
and stop fretting, over, if we'll be able to do the repairs that we want to do, or if we'll be able to, I think that's often our biggest hurdle when it comes to doing ministry.
Or else we will find ourselves having built beautiful museums and mausoleums, but ineffective churches.
This scene reminds me of?
What's that?
When I sort of contrast how God's extending this invitation and inviting everyone to come. He says, bring no money. He's not worried about what race, what gender, what socioeconomic status, their background. He's not worried about any of that. He's inviting them to come. and this invitation itself reflects what happens in the coming, how God, and he offers up his son Jesus freely, right? We've never seen in the text where God withholds the good things, the godly things from people. Conversely, I think about how we've all had some negative experience when somebody invites us over,
Yeah.
but they have set in their minds the things that they're willing to share,
Sure.
to cook,
Sure.
to do for you as
Sure.
a guest.
Sure. Sure.
Right? Their hospitality
Sure.
is very limited
Sure.
because they only want to share a limited set of resources.
Sure. Sure.
Or their hospitality is very self-centered.
Sure.
They're going to feed you what they like.
Sure.
They're not going to ask you what you like.
Sure.
They're not going to try to accommodate you in any way.
Or and conversely, we've been blessed
Mhm.
to go and to visit with someone and be wowed
Yeah, at their generosity,
at their generosity
and their compassion,
and their compassion and hospitality. You know?
I think compassion translates into hospitality because a person who has compassion will always be a good host because
Yeah.
they're going to be sensitive to the needs,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
of their guests.
And we have to ask ourselves this question. And here's where Dr. White's call to examine
Mhm.
our faithfulness
Mhm.
and our response to this invitation
Mhm.
really matters. When people come into our church, they leave
Mhm.
with an impression
Mhm.
that we were either one kind of host
Mhm.
or
Or
the
another.
other.
Yeah. What's sad though
Yeah.
is that over time, people develop sort of this the self-righteous,
Sure.
self-vindication,
Sure.
self-vindicating attitude that, well, if you don't like what I serve you,
Yeah.
then that's on you.
Yeah.
That's a lack of compassion.
Well, and not only that, but that's a gross and gripping
Mhm.
theological error.
Mhm.
That's a really problematic mindset to apply to the church, because what you're supposed to be serving
Mhm.
and what you're supposed to be sharing
Mhm.
is the gospel.
Yeah.
Is warmth and kindness and godliness and gentleness and meekness and humble. That's what and there's no universe where people don't like those things.
Yeah.
And so the reality of the matter is, if we develop that mindset in the church about, well, if they don't like it here,
Mhm.
they don't like what we're serving,
Yeah.
they can just go somewhere else. That's an indication
Yeah.
that we've made the church about us.
And it's self-serving. It's
Yeah.
a self-serving
Absolutely.
attitude. Well,
Absolutely.
this is how I do. This is how
Yeah.
what I like.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm going to offer you.
Right.
If you don't like what I have to offer you,
Yeah.
you can go somewhere else.
That's right.
That's self-serving. That
That's-
is not compassion, right?
That's where we have made it about me.
Mhm. It's ours at that point.
Again, I read this passage in Dr. White's devotional, and I had this experience when I was reading, many of his devotional passages. But it's a passage of scripture, and he's picked them so well and so strategically throughout the course of this devotional. But it's a passage of scripture that maybe we've read or maybe we've thought about, but he really gives it some attention. This, again, milk and wine and bread. These are staples,
right,
in the diet of those in the ancient world. The young people need milk. Wine is a staple of their drinking diet, and bread is a staple of their diet as well. God is offering them what they need.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just about these substances. These core substances are really illustrative points of all the ways in which God is able to supply our needs, our innermost needs. But the church is really offering people, or should be offering people, what they're in need of.
That's a great point, because I think this is an error we make on a large scale when we think about ministry.
Yeah.
You and I, we attended the virtual conference where we the statement was made. I'll never forget this quote.
Yeah.
Who it's planned by
is
who it's planned for.
Yeah. Yeah.
We make this mistake when we go to plan ministry or do ministry or do things for other people, and we only bring to the table the people like us, and never consider the people we're trying to serve.
Right.
So then we put together these programs and these events and these ministries
and these agendas and these
that
budgets.
we like.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, don't nobody show up but us.
Yeah.
Because you tailored it to fit you
Yeah.
and to suit you and to serve you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle when it comes to mission. And again, compassion is about seeing a need
Yeah.
and then meeting that need.
And asking systematically, consistently,
Yeah.
what are the needs
Right.
of the people that are around us? What God offers in this passage, the people who heard it originally
Mm-hmm.
would have heard milk and went, "Wow, I need milk."
Mm-hmm.
They would have heard wine and went, "Wow, wine is
Yeah.
a staple of our." They would have heard bread and went, "Oh, wow, these are all things that we need."
Yeah.
God
Mm-hmm.
has demonstrated His awareness
Right.
of our needs
Mm-hmm.
by what He offers us.
Right.
And that's true not only about milk and wine and bread in this passage, but that's true about salvation.
Yeah.
God has demonstrated His awareness
Mm-hmm.
of our needs by sending His Son
Mm-hmm.
to die on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
You see,
Mm-hmm.
and so then the church, if we're the Lord's people, must then demonstrate our awareness of the needs around us.
And this, I think this kind of contradicts the notion or the opinion that in order to do a certain type of ministry, you have to have a certain type of person already in your church. Right?
Sure.
In order to have youth ministry, you got to have more young people to do youth ministry.
Right.
I don't think it requires that.
Right.
I think what it requires is someone who has the compassion
Yeah.
To reach that particular people group.
Right.
Someone who's willing to say, you know what, this may not be something that I've done in the past. I may not have a ton of experience doing this, but it's something that I know certain people need.
Right.
I want to help fulfill that need to the best of my ability. I may not be the best at it,
Sure,
but I do have the compassion. I have a heart.
the
to meet that need.
compassion and the faithfulness.
Yeah.
Right. The person who understands, hey, this service
Mhm.
is going to require of me
Yeah.
time, energy, effort, and resource.
Yeah.
But I'm going to continue to serve in this capacity
Mhm.
because I see the value
Mhm.
of it.
Mhm.
You know, there's so much, and I think about this, man, as I read my Bible. There's so much that we need from God. No, there's a great place to look at this in the 23rd Psalms. You see everything that sheep need.
Yeah.
We're very needy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think we have a clear and concise view of all the things we need from God.
Mhm.
But I think we change our perspective when we start thinking about the needs of other people.
Yeah.
We take a long list of things we need from God in prayer,
Mhm.
but we have a short list of needs that we're willing to respond to that the people have in the world around us.
Yeah.
And this passage, again, God challenges us with His generosity.
Yeah. I think that is the lesson, right? Because we learn that since God is the giver, we can trust that even the things that are temporal,
Yeah.
God can make them last.
Yeah.
He can restore them, He can renew them, or He can just give us something totally brand new. So we don't have to be worried if we're employing our resources to the glory of God
Mhm.
to serve Him and His people.
Yeah.
God will make provisions
Yeah.
for us. So we
Yeah.
don't have to be worried,
Yeah.
right? And rubbing our hands together,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how do we make this last?
Yeah.
At the expense of seeing people come to Him.
Yeah.
So I mean, the ultimate lesson is just to have that compassion and to open up our hearts to reflect the generosity
Yeah.
of God, even in this passage.
There has to be nothing more frustrating
Yeah.
for the Lord
Yeah.
than to look down on us
Mhm.
and all of the resources that He's given us,
Yeah.
and see so much of it and so many of them completely unused,
Mhm.
untouched,
Mhm.
unbothered. You know,
Mhm.
there has to be some angst happening in the heart of God when He says, I've given you so much. I've given you so many ways
Mhm.
to be of service, but you were so consumed
Yeah.
with preserving it
Yeah.
and keeping it that you forgot about the God who gave it to you and the purpose for which He gave it to you. And this passage challenges us not to make that mistake.
Yeah. No. Again, Pastor Woodall, enjoyed the First Baptist. Thank you so much again. Thank you to everybody online again. I apologize for the quality perhaps I think I was getting a message that said that the Wi-Fi was a little unstable. So we'll try to sort through that before next week. But thank
We're
you for
grateful
joining us.
for all of you.
We appreciate